So, with a few sides painted and detailed quite nicely, I need to do the same thing everywhere else. I'll do some blending here, just a little bit, by picking a color and going over certain elements to blend them in so it's not a very sharp shape that pops out. And take a good look around after zooming out to see what is my next step. I have all the sides fairly nicely detailed, but in need of some cleanup. Even though there's a charm to having it a bit more loose, where you can obviously see the strokes. For this particular one, I want to take it just a little step further. So lots of color picking of colors right next to sort of where they meet other colors and values, and I'm going to lightly brush to make them blend in. I'm thinking here of how do I say it? How far I want that soft edge to go in. Say if you look at the edges which are brighter, on the edges of the 3D model, how deep I want that brightness to go into the plane, whether it's just a little bit, or does it stretch for half the mesh in a way. That's the kind of thing I'm thinking about when I'm blending these in, because if I stretch it too much, it'll start looking a bit like subsurface scattering that is going too deep. So I'm careful not to overdo it and keep that in my head while working on these. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to be showing something like this and me telling you the do's and don'ts when I know it's going to depend on a specific project, a specific piece, and the final results. And there's just so many different factors that come into this. So, keeping it simple. Otherwise, there's no one stopping you of adding, say, a slope blur on top of the whole thing in the end to get sort of a painterly look. With the right adjustments, it could be a nice filter to have on top. Really like the area that I'm painting on now, just that brighter plane turning, going hand in hand with the 3D model. That is a nice addition on otherwise very simple mesh. Again, the zoom out helps me take a better look at the whole model, and I noticed that these edges are really standing out. They're very saturated. They have edges that are a bit too sharp. So I'll be working on those, as well as everything else I notice, especially these areas where I've had really large brush strokes that look just way too painterly for what I want. So a bit more color picking, just painting next to it, more color picking, and painting it on top with making sure not to press down too hard to keep the opacity of the brush low. It's a bit of a grasshopper mode now, because I'm just going to jump around from place to place and work over wherever I see needs a bit of love. This comes with that second stage, not second, but another stage in the painting, where you have everything pretty blocked in. There's a nice amount of details everywhere, but you want a bit of extra details, and more cleanup in certain areas. Here's where I find that bit of difference from painting textures and making an illustration or just painting is that in a painting you usually wouldn't detail every piece of the canvas in the same way. You might want to add more details where your focal point is. We can try and think the same way with texture. If there's something you want to emphasize, you can spend a bit more time and detail it out more if you want something to read as more important part. But overall, in textures, that doesn't play in too much. Not that it couldn't, it definitely could. Again, to make a comparison with painting, you usually, or that's kind of how our eyes perceive it, there's more detail in the light and there's less detail in the shadows, right? So you could try the same approach or add some of that element in the textures. Wherever there's highlights, you'll add a bit more, say on a metal, you'll add a bit more scratches and little details, and whatever is in the shadow, you can keep more loose, more lost edges in there. You're not gonna see all the tiny dust particles, and the scratches are not gonna be catching light. So just sort of through the nature of how we see things is also your approach in painting textures. And I'm gonna guess if you're watching this, you are into painting, right? So there's two books that I found most helpful for me when it comes to all those type of things, details in light, no details in shadows, and just sort of little rules, which are not really rules, they're suggestions, as all things are in art. Anyway, the books are by James Gurney, and it's Imaginative Realism and Color and Light. They talk about the different aspects of, well, painting, which translates nicely into what we're doing here. Such things that I've mentioned throughout the course already, but briefly, you would find a chapter about that can explain it much better than I can. And there's also plenty of dinosaurs. It's nice. Well, it's not about digital art. Those things obviously are universal, and just about good picture making, which translates well into all kinds of paintings and 3D. Seeing the texture come together this way in real time, it can be a bit tough to see the big change that is happening, because it's throughout an hour or something. So I would sometimes click the layer on and off just to see if what I'm doing is making a difference. And then I start questioning myself if it's worth adding all this detail. Well, better be a very nice close-up shot in the end. And I'm going to turn off the wireframe, even though it was very faint. I just want it very clear and clean right now to continue adding any more painting on top. At this point, with this smaller details, it's just started getting in the way. There we go with the on and off, just to see what's making a difference in the painting. I'm just getting rid of the same detail that is on the other side that came from having the mirror on. Since I have textures, unique textures on all sides, there's no reason to, well, not have unique details on here. I'm still considering at this point how much of these edge effects and overall just effects you'd see on a material I want to include in the texture. But at the end of the day, there is no ending point for this little prop. So it's sort of whatever goes. In this stage, most of the work is already laid down. It's more about making sure it looks pretty now, getting rid of some of the weird looking brush strokes, cleaning up areas, and overall bringing the whole prop to the same level of finish. Planar separation that I have here in between the two sides is it's nice to have for a fully hand painted prop, but it might be a little kind of weird and off if you are applying a prop, a PBR kind of material. Then you might want all the edges, all the sides to be the same tonal values. These are the kind of decisions you'll have to make depending on the final presentation. And I'm just going around tightening up the edges, adding just a bit of transition. I don't think I want anywhere to be a complete hard edge. Even on the hardest looking edges in the reference, I'll still add just what I'm doing here with a bit of a brush stroke in between the two views. And I'm trying to get interesting shapes in between all these bigger shapes, not to keep it repetitive, not to make it look generated, and keeping in mind to vary the distances between smaller details to make it look more interesting, because it's all too easy to make it very mechanical looking. The way I like to think about those type of things is always in contrasts. So it's contrasts of detail, contrasts of shapes, and contrasts of hues. How much of that white yellow fat bit is there compared to the meat bit, how thick is one bit compared to the other, how many more darker shapes I'm adding in there. And I want there to be more of one thing than the other. So it's not a 50-50, which will make it look mechanical. So you see, I guess just check all the fat bits. So the bottom one is thinner, the top one is a bit thicker, and then the middle one has the extra line in there. It's little things like that that help make it look more natural. There are bigger, flatter shapes like this one I'm working over now that I'm gonna just try to break up a little bit with a few extra details. Doesn't need to be too much. There's no need to add all the details everywhere. We can be very picky where we add that, because as long as we'll have details in the focal area, not that there is a focal area specifically in this one, but as long as there's details somewhere that the viewer can see, they can imagine that the other parts all have that detail as well. Again, very similar to how it works in a painting. If you have a lot of detail in the foreground, say it's grass or trees, tree leaves, or some very detailed texture, anything in the further away from the camera, you can barely see that detail, but as a viewer you know that that's how it looks, because you already see it up close with all the detail added. When it comes to deciding how detailed you want it, obviously you're going to be going for a certain type of texture, certain type of look, so that might just dictate what you're doing. Otherwise, I would sometimes run into, say, little issues where I don't know where it's going and how to continue overall. Then what I'll do is I'll just pick out an area to work over and finish that, just to have it as a example of where I wanna take the whole piece. It's almost just to put yourself in that better mindset that you don't feel stuck anymore, to take and work over a part that you feel more comfortable in, or that you can see how you can take further. In short, if you're working on an area and it's just not working out, there's no need to keep on going and going. Just leave it for a little bit, work on something else, come back to it later, and you'll have fresh eyes, you'll have fresher mindset, and it's going to be easier to tackle than just kind of keep hitting at it. End of the day, you want to enjoy this. Problem solving is definitely part of 3D art. Don't want to get stuck and bang your head against the wall. Looking around, I still keep finding these little areas to blend together to fix up the very big brushstrokes I've done in the beginning. Kind of, there's 4 sides, but it felt almost never ending. I kept rotating and there was just always a new side to paint. And while it's nice and makes the whole thing look very hand painted, I think if I was to do it again, I would just paint one side, bring it into Photoshop, copy it on every other side, come back into Substance Painter with what will look like a almost finished texture, because say I finished the one side, even add some variations with a clone tool, and that would be a very nice way to just start working on it, almost from a more finished point. But that's kind of me just being quite process driven. I'm interested in the different approaches, so very likely doing it again, I would not do it in the same exact way. I would analyze it a little bit and see if I can improve on it, whether how to make it the same result but faster, how to approach it differently and maybe give me a more interesting result, how to make the process more enjoyable, how to minimize the sort of manual labor that comes in to repeating the same things over and over in the process. Maybe there's more to do with procedural generation and such things. It's just a bit of a curse of mine that I can't do two pieces in a row in the same way, unless of course it's for work. Then I can. But for personal stuff, I'm always exploring and never have a style that I stick to, which can be both good and bad. In my case, it's good because I can do many different things, so it helps me out my day to day, and it just keeps things interesting for me. You have to keep it fun. It takes a while doing these things. At this point, I'm adding some very small detail that I'm not even sure is very necessary. I'd like it to be more of an indication now that I'm looking at it, but trying to add this sort of textural look on the, not the highlights, but they're kind of that almost. So I'm trying to add this textural look by just going kind of stroke dot dot with a little brush, which will soon lead into a final part where I'm just adding the very highlights, so the brightest brights all around. If this was going somewhere as a final prop, then in between stages, I would definitely want to see it in that final version. So if I have a scene where this goes to, every half an hour or so, with this specific one, I would put it in that scene and see how it looks there, and then decide, do I need to add more detail? Is it all right? Does it even make sense to add more detail or highlights or anything? Because all it matters is how it looks in that specific scene, in that final version of where it's going to appear. That should be your judgment point, not within Substance Painter, but where is it going to appear as a final version. It may turn out that doing all these details is completely unnecessary if this is a small piece in a big, on a big table. In my case, I'm doing this sort of hero prop to want to show you the technique and just take it a bit further than perhaps necessary for something as little as this. It's also a practice exercise, so I want to push it far. I'm going to probably render it up close, turn around, where you can see everything. So I'm okay in this case not checking, in any final scene, because I will want to show everything. My final scene will be about showing everything, all the work that I've done in this stage, in the texturing. But the important bit is that you have some sort of reference point that tells you how far you should take it. I'm starting on the final bit, final stage of the painting, adding these little highlight details, which I will soon realize and create a new layer for. Just kind of jumping around with my eyes, and if I spot something, I'm fixing it. But moving on to the final bit. There's always gonna be something to fix, something to adjust. It's important to know when to stop yourself as well. It looks alright once I zoom out. It just seems like it is missing some of the smallest highlight details, and just some of the blending. Some of the lines are becoming a bit too sharp on the edges here, so just blend those in with a bigger brush. Take a good look around. I believe I will spot the bottom that I haven't touched at all. That's a quick fix. I don't want much detail here at all. I just want sort of illusion of texture, illusion of detail in this spot. So a brush quite big, I'll just go over it just so it looks, and well, it will be touched up with the brush, and that should be fine for what I need. See, just so it has a sort of a definition of something. I mean, it is painted and it looks like it's kind of painted. It has that textury feel, even though there's nothing really specific, as long as it matches the rest of the texture and it's not this airbrushy nonsense that it was before. Time for a new layer for the highlights, and the rest of this is going to be in the final chapter of this part of the course. And there's a few extra things that come in handy having this on a separate layer, which we'll touch upon in the next chapter. Now it's just important to find the right color. You see I'm going pretty high on the value now. It's very close to white, but not there yet. But it's more than enough for it to really pop out and look like the highlights. That's all for this chapter. I'll see you in the next and final one.